My girlfriend cheated with my boss, and I ended up taking his job and firing them both on the same day. I still remember reading the first message that made everything fall apart in my head. It wasn't even explicit at first, just a notification that didn't belong on her phone's screen when she left it on the kitchen counter. My boss's name lighting up next to a heart emoji I had never seen her use with me. At that moment, I felt something shift, like my life had quietly changed direction without asking me. I worked at a mid-sized tech company that everyone thought was stable and boring. I was a product strategist, not powerful, not loud, just reliable enough to be useful. My boss, Daniel, was the kind of man who always spoke like he was mentoring you even when he was just assigning work. My girlfriend, Mira, had been with me for 3 years, long before I even got promoted into Daniel's team. We were supposed to be building a future together, or at least that's what I believed. I didn't confront her immediately. I told myself there had to be an explanation. But over the next week, I started noticing patterns I had been too comfortable to see before. Late-night work emergencies that didn't line up with real deadlines, sudden distance when I talked about my day, and the way she always seemed slightly too calm when I mentioned Daniel's name. Then I saw it again. Another message preview when she was showering. This time it wasn't subtle. It was familiarity, comfort, inside jokes I had never been part of, and a line that just sat in my mind like a weight I couldn't shake. Same time after your meeting with him? I didn't sleep that night, not because I was angry right away, but because I was trying to understand how long I had been the only person who didn't know. By morning, I wasn't even crying anymore. I was just watching everything differently. At work, Daniel acted the same as always. Friendly in meetings, slightly dismissive when I challenged him, too confident in rooms where no one questioned him. But now every smile felt like it had a second meaning I couldn't see yet. I didn't accuse anyone. I started observing instead, and what I noticed was worse than I expected. Mira and Daniel weren't hiding panic. They were hiding routine, which meant this wasn't new. I stopped bringing her up casually at home. I stopped reacting to Daniel's praise in meetings, and I started documenting everything in a way that didn't look like documentation. Just patterns in my head at first, then notes I stored in places no one would think to check. 2 weeks later, I confirmed it without needing proof from either of them. A company dinner, mandatory attendance, alcohol flowing too freely for a professional setting, and Mira arriving later than me, sitting at the far end of the table. Except she didn't stay there. She moved seats after 20 minutes. Not toward me, toward him. Daniel didn't even hesitate when she sat beside him, like it was expected, like it had always been that way. I watched them talk like they shared a private rhythm, small touches that looked accidental to anyone not paying attention. But I was paying attention now. Every laugh between them felt like it excluded me personally, and something in me stopped wanting to compete for a place I was already being erased from. That night, I didn't go home with her. I stayed late at work under the excuse of finishing a project. Daniel was still in the office too, which was unusual but not unheard of. What was unusual was Mira showing up an hour later with coffee for him. She didn't even look surprised to see me there, just paused for half a second, then smiled like I was an inconvenience she had learned to manage. "I thought you left already," she said casually, and Daniel added, "We were just going over next quarter plans." Except they weren't. I knew enough about those plans to know that wasn't true, but I said nothing, because I finally understood something important. They weren't afraid of being caught. They were comfortable enough to believe I wouldn't matter if I did. That was the moment something inside me stopped trying to fix things and started thinking about structure instead. Not revenge, not emotion, structure, power, position. Over the next month, I became invisible in a very intentional way. I agreed more in meetings. I stopped pushing back on Daniel publicly. I let him think I was settling into obedience, and I let Mira think I was too tired to notice anything. But I started speaking more with people above Daniel, not in an obvious way, just asking questions about company direction, learning who actually influenced decisions and who just thought they did. And slowly I realized something people under stress often miss. Daniel wasn't as secure as he looked. He was just loud enough to cover uncertainty. There had been internal frustration with his leadership style for months. I heard it from different departments without ever being directly told. Missed deadlines, high turnover in his team, projects that looked good in presentations but collapsed in execution, and the same phrase kept coming up. Too much ego, not enough follow-through. I stored that quietly, carefully, not as ammunition, as context. Mira noticed I was changing, but she misread it. She thought I was detaching from her emotionally because of stress at work. She even tried to act supportive at first, cooking dinner more often, asking about my day in a softer voice, but it felt rehearsed now, like she was trying to maintain a version of us that no longer existed. One night she asked if I still loved her, and I realized I didn't even have an immediate answer anymore, not because I was angry, but because I was no longer anchored to the version of her I had believed in. "I don't know," I said honestly, and that honesty scared her more than any accusation would have. 2 days later, I learned something that changed everything again. There was a leadership restructuring being discussed, not public yet, but already in motion, and Daniel was not guaranteed to stay in his role. That was the first time I felt something shift from pain to possibility, not because I wanted his downfall, but because I realized the system itself was already unstable. I didn't have to break it. I just had to position myself inside the change. I started working longer hours, but differently, not as a loyal employee trying to impress, as someone building visibility without looking like he was trying. I began taking ownership of cross-team problems no one wanted to claim, fixing them quietly, letting others present the results. I became the name people associated with stability. Meanwhile, Daniel grew more tense. He started over-explaining decisions, interrupting more in meetings, trying to assert control where it didn't feel natural anymore. And Mira started pulling away from him slightly, like she could sense the shift but didn't know where to land. That was when I realized she had never been loyal to stability, only to status. One evening she came home late again and didn't realize I was still awake. She was on the phone in the hallway, whispering, laughing softly. Daniel's name again, but this time it didn't hurt the same way. It just confirmed what I already knew, and I finally felt detached enough to plan clearly without emotional interference. The restructuring announcement came 2 weeks later. Daniel was being removed from his position, not fired outright, reassigned. A controlled exit, corporate language for losing influence without public embarrassment. And that same day, I was invited to a closed leadership meeting. I didn't fully understand why at first, until I walked in and saw the faces around the table. People who made decisions I had only ever heard about indirectly. One of them knew my name better than I expected. They referenced my recent cross-team work, my problem-solving consistency, my ability to stabilize failing projects without escalating conflict. And then came the question that changed my trajectory. If you were given more structural authority, what would you change first? I answered honestly, not strategically, honestly. I talked about accountability gaps, about leadership inconsistency, about how teams weren't failing from lack of talent, but from lack of direction stability. I didn't mention Daniel. I didn't need to. They already knew. The meeting ended without clarity, but something had been set in motion. That night, Mira tried to reconnect with me again. More emotional this time, more vulnerable. She said she felt like I was slipping away from her, and I realized she wasn't wrong, but not in the way she thought. I think we've already ended, I told her quietly. She tried to argue, but even she didn't sound convinced. The next morning, Daniel was officially out, and I was asked to step into an interim leadership role. Not CEO, not yet, but close enough to matter. I didn't celebrate, I just worked, because I understood something simple now. Positions aren't taken in a moment. They are earned in silence before anyone notices. Over the next few weeks, I stabilized departments that had been quietly struggling under Daniel for months. People responded quickly, not because I was strict, but because I was consistent, and consistency, I realized, had been missing for a long time. Mira started noticing the shift externally before internally. She saw people at work treating me differently. She saw my name in internal updates more often, and I could feel her recalculating everything she thought she knew about me. But by then, I wasn't part of her emotional world anymore. I was something she observed from a distance. Then came the final board transition meeting. I was called in again. This time the tone was different, more final, more formal, more decisive. They offered me the role permanently, CEO, not because I chased it, but because I had become the most stable option in a period of instability. I accepted, without theatrics, without hesitation. The news of Daniel's final departure was handled internally. Professional language, clean exit, no scandal, just replacement. And then came the moment I had been avoiding thinking about directly. Mira found out through internal channels before I even told her. She came to my office that evening, standing in the doorway like she didn't recognize the place anymore or me. You knew this would happen, she said quietly. I looked at her for a long moment and realized she wasn't talking about the job. She was talking about everything. I didn't know, I said honestly. I just stopped pretending I didn't see it. She tried to explain herself, not fully apologetic, more conflicted, like she believed she had been reacting to circumstances rather than choosing them, and maybe she had, but that didn't change where we were now. I didn't want to hurt you, she said finally, and I believed she believed that. But intention had stopped mattering months ago. Daniel was gone from her life too by then, not dramatically, just distance, just consequence. She asked if there was any version of us left, and I told her the truth that had been forming for a long time. There's no version of us that didn't rely on me not seeing what was happening, I said. She left without another word, and I didn't stop her. The following weeks were quieter than I expected, not peaceful, just clear. Work stabilized, teams adjusted. People stopped looking over their shoulders so much, but I kept thinking about how easily everything had been living alongside me without my full awareness. Not because I was naive, but because I had trusted stability that was never mutual. One evening, I stayed late alone in the office again. Same building, same glass walls, different position, different weight. I thought about Daniel, not with anger anymore, but with understanding of how fragile confidence can be when it's built on unchecked control. And I thought about Mira, not as a villain, but as someone who always followed where validation felt strongest. And I realized the hardest truth wasn't betrayal itself. It was how normal it had felt while it was happening. Months later, I received a message from her. Short, careful, no expectations. "I hope you're okay. I think I finally understand what I lost." I didn't reply immediately, not out of cruelty, but because there was nothing left to negotiate emotionally. When I finally did respond, it was only one line. "I hope you understand it wasn't sudden for me." I never heard back, and that was fine, because by then I had learned something I didn't expect from all of it. Power doesn't change people as much as clarity does, and clarity doesn't always bring peace. Sometimes it just removes the illusion that things were ever equal. Even now, I don't think of it as revenge. That word feels too emotional for what actually happened. It was structure correcting itself, slowly, quietly, without needing anger to guide it. But some nights, I still think about how many versions of that life existed at the same time, and how I was the last person to see which one was real.